Hi. So I've decided to teach you a poem by William Wordsworth, in part because I know that a lot of you don't like poetry, and hopefully you like reading a lot more after your freedom of choice reading experience, but I know that a lot of you are not even real fans of reading. And I think one of the reasons why people don't like reading is because they think that it's not, it doesn't really teach you anything, particularly fiction books or poems. And if you feel like it's not relevant, then you're not going to be interested in it. And a lot of you who even like reading will think that you can learn more from the real world than you can from a poem. And we can argue about that, but funnily enough, there's a poet who thinks exactly that. He thinks that you can learn a lot more from the natural world and from the real world and from ordinary speech than you can from fancy poems with complicated rhyme schemes and complicated words that don't make any sense. So, just a little bit about this poet. His name, as I said, is William Wordsworth, and he was born in 1770 and died in 1850. Now that's a really long time ago, but you'll see when I read you the poem that even though it's written 300 years ago, there are very few words in this poem that you won't understand and with which you will not be familiar. So that's actually a conscious choice on his behalf, because he believed that poetry should be written in everyday language, and it should not just everyday language, of course, but he said that poetry was emotion recollected in tranquility. So he believed that you should write about experiences, real experiences, and then reflect on them and write about them. Now, ironically enough, I think that even though he's a very English poet, because he was born in England, in the countryside, in 1770, when England still was full of countryside, unlike today, when it's so urbanized that there aren't any dirt roads, every single road is tarred. I actually think that we in South Africa can understand William Wordsworth and his love for the natural world better than a lot of English people from his own country, simply because we still have a lot of wild natural spaces, and all of you, when you go on journey next year, will learn from the natural spaces that you experience on your journey. And that's the whole idea of going out into the natural world and of learning about it. Now, this particular poem is called "A Slumber Did My Spirit Seal." Now, a slumber, of course, is a sleep, and if something seals your spirit, it closes it. So a seal, like a seal on an envelope. So a slumber did my spirit seal. And in this poem, Wordsworth uses the natural world and his experience of the natural world to talk about death, and particularly the death of a young woman, and not even a young woman, but a woman who's still a little girl. And this poem is one of several called the Lucy poems, and in all of them it describes a young woman who dies before her time. And I think that they are incredibly powerful because of the way that he writes them in this very simple way, but that still somehow manages to carry such power. So anyway, before I completely oversell this poem, I'll read it to you from the beginning. A slumber did my spirit seal. I had no earthly fears. She seemed a thing that could not feel the touch of earthly years. No motion has she now, no force. She neither hears nor sees. Rolled round in earth's diurnal course with rocks and stones and trees. So that's a very short poem, and that's it. It's just 2 verses long. It has an A-B rhyme scheme. That's quite simple, but I'm sure you heard in the poem, as I said, there are very few complicated words. The only one that maybe you wouldn't have heard before is diurnal, di meaning 2, diurnal, day and night, so Earth's diurnal course, because of course each part of that Earth will see day and night in a particular day. So what I'd like to do is to start from the beginning and go through the poem thinking of it in one way, and then go through it again thinking of it in another way. And what's so exciting to me about this poem, apart from the fact that I think it is incredibly powerful, is that you can think of this poem in a whole lot of different ways. There isn't just one way to interpret what Wordsworth says in this poem. So the first 2 lines, "A slumber did my spirit seal, I had no earthly fears." So first of all, if you say that slumber did my spirit seal, maybe it just means that you're asleep and you're dreaming. And the next line, "I had no earthly fears." Perhaps if you're dreaming, you can't really understand the things of the earth, the things that you understand when you're conscious. She seemed a thing that could not feel, this is now the 3rd line, she seemed a thing that could not feel the touch of earthly years. And again, perhaps she's this dream figure in his imagination. She seemed a thing that could not feel the touch of earthly years. And perhaps Wordsworth is saying that this dream figure is so beautiful and so pure and so innocent that you feel like she could never grow old and never die. But of course, this is quite harshly interrupted, that imagining, in the next stanza. So, no motion has she now, no force. And I think the punctuation, when you look at the poem, is also very expressive. So, no motion has she now, comma, no force. So it's that repetition. She has no motion, she has no force. She cannot move, and she has no power within her anymore. And of course, if you have no motion and no force, the only time that ever happens to you is when you have, in fact, passed away. Next line, she neither hears nor sees. Again, he's emphasizing that fact that this beautiful girl who he knew in this dream, not only does she have no motion, no force, but she is no longer in any way a part of her physical body. She doesn't have any of her senses. She is dead in every sense of the word. And then he says that she is rolled around, and that rolling R sound, that alliteration, I think that really expresses the way that she is being rolled round. You can imagine her being rolled. But of course, how is she being rolled if she's dead, if she has no motion and no force? But of course, as soon as you hear the next 4 words, then you understand. So Lucy is rolled around in Earth's diurnal course. And diurnal course, in other words, she's buried in the ground, and she is rolling round with the earth. So she's moving with the earth since she's been buried in the ground, with rocks and stones and trees. And again, I think that the punctuation there is very expressive. So you have a comma after rocks, and again after stones and trees. And he doesn't say with rocks, stones, and trees. He says with rocks and stones and trees. And that itemization there, I feel like it makes it makes it even more specific. You can imagine her being buried in the ground, and she has become like a rock and like a stone and like a tree. So perhaps it's a very indirect metaphor there, because she's being compared to the natural world. Her body is her person, I suppose, because of course Wordsworth was a Christian poet, although not as Christian as some of the other old poets that you'll read. But he was a Christian poet, so he would have believed that Lucy's soul was elsewhere, but that her body had become one with the rocks and the stones and the trees. And of course, when you love someone, whether it's a little girl, maybe you could imagine in your own lives, maybe your little sister, or even, you're all quite young as well, and I'm sure that if I was a parent, I would feel as though girls your age were still children in some sense. And of course, when someone like that dies, you miss their soul, but there's also that physical presence that you miss. And you miss that sense of their vitality and their enjoyment of life from their own perspective, from their own bodies. And this poem really does express that sense of loss of a physical body. Bell ringing. Better get a move on, she said. All right, so that's the first reading, but of course there are several ambiguities here. So when you go back to the beginning, a slumber did my spirit seal, I had no earthly fears. When you go back to the beginning, you could think, well, maybe he's not literally asleep. Maybe it was that his own sense of people's mortality was dead, or not dead, but asleep. So I think, and I have this feeling all the time, and I'm sure you do as well, being as young as you are, we feel like we're going to live forever, but of course we're not. So perhaps when he says, a slumber did my spirit seal, I had no earthly fears, perhaps what he means is that sense that this girl could die is asleep. So he just feels like she'll be immortal, and that sense of treasuring someone's life because you know they're going to die is absent. Perhaps that's what he's saying in these first two lines. And then when he says, she seemed a thing that could not feel the touch of earthly years, again, perhaps he just looks at her and he thinks that she is immortal, again, because she is so pure and so young and so innocent and yet so alive. But then of course the next stanza, no motion has she now, no force, she neither hears nor sees, rolled round in earth's diurnal course with rocks and stones and trees. If you read the first stanza as I have explained it now, which is as a young woman who he knew, who he didn't really appreciate fully when she was alive, when you think of it like that, then I think that the second stanza has a great deal of regret in it, when he emphasizes the fact that all those things that he never appreciated about her being alive before. And again, it's that physicality, so the fact that she herself is no longer around. So no motion has she now, no force. She neither hears nor sees, rolled round in earth's diurnal course with rocks and stones and trees. And when she was alive, she was a living being full of promise and feeling the world and hearing it and seeing it. But now she no longer has those aspects of her because she has died. So what are the themes of this poem? Well, there's several. Obviously, one of them could be regret at not appreciating someone when they're alive. Another one could be that a loss of innocence, a loss of life, death, in other words, is definitely a theme here. But at the same time, I think that you could argue that there's a theme of unity with the natural world. So when she loses her, even when she loses all her senses and she is just a body, she becomes one with the earth. And I think you could interpret that, as I've said previously, as a regret that you missed out on her being fully alive. But on the other hand, perhaps it's a comfort knowing that her body is not separate from this earth that Wordsworth loved so much. And in that, which I'll go back to the beginning when I was explaining that Wordsworth really loved the natural world and believed that it could teach us so much, I think that this poem goes back to that, because even though she's dead, even though he misses her, at least she is a part of this natural world that he loves so much. As a conclusion, I'd like to say that Wordsworth's poem is one of several. There are actually more Lucy poems. There's another one that I think that is close to as beautiful as this, but this is definitely my favorite because I suppose it's quite ambiguous and you can get different meanings from it, but also because I think it's just incredibly beautiful without being consciously so. For me, this poem is beautiful like a tree is beautiful, because it's not overly adorned, it's very simple, but at the same time, a tree is magnificent and splendid and beautiful in its own right. It's not like a jeweled necklace that human hands have overwrought and made beautiful through a lot of effort. For me, this poem feels very organic and lovely. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this poem, and I hope you enjoy answering questions on it, and also that you will go and look up some of the other Lucy poems. Thank you.